Hello, my name is Ethan. I'm 31. I work as a carpenter, mostly doing custom cabinets and built-ins for people who want something that'll last longer than the particle board stuff you get at the big box stores. I live in a small apartment building on Maple Street, one of those places built in the 1960s where the walls are thin enough that you learn more about your neighbors than you ever wanted to know. That's how I first heard Sophia. It was a Tuesday evening in late September. I just gotten home from a job site, my hands still smelling like wood stain and my back aching from hunching over a cabinet frame all day. I was heating up leftover pizza when I heard it through the wall that separates my kitchen from the unit next door. Crying. Not the dramatic sobbing you hear in movies, but the quiet, exhausted kind that comes from someone who's been holding it in for too long. I stood there with a slice of cold pizza halfway to my mouth, listening. The sound was muffled, but unmistakable. Someone was having a really bad night. I'd lived in this building for 3 years and had never heard anything like this from next door. Usually, it was just the occasional television or the sound of footsteps on creaky floorboards. The crying stopped after a few minutes, but something about it stuck with me. There was a rawness to it that made my chest feel tight. I finished my dinner in silence, occasionally glancing at the wall as if I could somehow see through it. Over the next few weeks, it became a pattern. Always in the evening, always that same quiet desperation. Sometimes it lasted 5 minutes, sometimes longer. I found myself timing my routine around it, making sure I was home by 7, listening for any sign of distress from the other side of that thin wall. I started to piece together small details about my neighbor. She worked irregular hours, coming and going at different times. I'd hear her key in the lock when I was getting ready for work at 6 o'clock in the morning or catch glimpses of her through my peephole as she headed down the hallway with grocery bags. She was probably in her late 20s with dark hair that she usually wore pulled back. And she had this way of walking that suggested she was always thinking about something else. But I never heard her voice. Not talking on the phone, not having friends over, not even singing along to music. Just those evening tears and the ordinary sounds of someone living alone. The first time I considered knocking on her door was on a Thursday night in October. The crying had been going on for almost 20 minutes, longer than usual, and there was something different about it, more desperate. I actually walked to my front door and stood there with my hand raised, ready to knock. But what would I say? "Hi! I've been listening to you cry through the wall for weeks." That sounded creepy even to me. So, I went back to my couch and tried to focus on the book I was reading, but the words kept blurring together. I kept thinking about my sister Clara, who'd gone through a rough divorce 2 years ago. She told me later that the worst part wasn't the fighting or the lawyers or even the loneliness. It was the feeling that no one knew how much she was hurting, that she was invisible in her pain. Maybe that's what my neighbor needed, not solutions or advice, just someone to acknowledge that her pain was real and unwitnessed. But I still didn't knock. The building manager, Mr. Henderson, was replacing the hallway carpet that week. I ran into him on Friday morning as he was measuring the corridor outside my door. He was one of those guys who'd been doing property management for 30 years and had stories about every tenant who'd ever lived in the building. "You know anything about the woman in 4B? I asked, trying to sound casual. He looked up from his tape measure. "Sophia, nice girl. Keeps to herself." "Why?" "So, her name was Sophia, not Gina. I'd been thinking of her as Gina for some reason. Maybe because she reminded me of a girl I'd known in high school who had the same way of carrying herself, like she was protecting something fragile. Just wondering. I never see her around much." "She's a nurse," Mr. Henderson said, going back to his measuring. "Works at the hospital downtown. Weird shifts, you know. Sometimes she's gone for 3 days straight, sometimes she's home for a week. Tough job nursing." That explained the irregular schedule. And maybe it explained the crying, too. I'd never thought much about what it would be like to spend your days around sick people, watching families fall apart, dealing with emergencies and loss on a regular basis. How do you come home from that and just switch it off? The carpet installation took 3 days. During that time, I didn't hear any crying from next door. Maybe the noise and disruption were enough to change her routine. Or maybe she was working one of those long shifts Mr. Henderson had mentioned. When the new carpet was finally in and the building settled back to normal, I found myself listening more intently than before. Tuesday came and went without any sound from 4B. Wednesday too. By Thursday, I was starting to worry. Had something happened to her? Had she moved out? Then on Friday evening, I heard it again. But this time it was different. Angry crying, if that makes sense. The kind that comes with frustration and exhaustion mixed together. It was louder than usual, and I could hear her moving around like she was pacing. I made a decision. I went to my kitchen and put the kettle on. While the water heated, I rummaged through my cabinets until I found a box of chamomile tea that my sister had given me months ago. I'd never opened it, but Clara swore by it for stressful days. I made 2 cups, adding honey to both because I figured if someone was crying, they probably needed something sweet. With both mugs in my hands, I walked to my front door and out into the hallway. The new carpet was soft under my feet, muffling my footsteps. I stood in front of 4B for a moment, listening. The crying had stopped, but I could hear movement inside. I knocked. 3 soft taps, not too urgent, but loud enough to be heard. The movement inside stopped completely. I waited, holding the steaming mugs, wondering if she would pretend not to be home. Then I heard footsteps approaching the door. A pause, the sound of the peephole covers sliding back. "Who is it?" Her voice was rough from crying, but softer than I'd expected. "I'm Ethan from 4 Ampers. Next door. I brought you some tea." Another pause. I could almost feel her confusion through the door. "Tea? Chamomile? It's supposed to help with stress," I thought. I trailed off, realizing how strange this must seem to her. "Look, I know this is weird, but I've been hearing you cry through the wall, and I just wanted you to know that someone cares. You don't have to let me in or anything. I can just leave the tea by your door." Silence stretched between us. I was starting to think I'd made a terrible mistake when I heard the chain sliding and the deadbolt turning. The door opened just wide enough for me to see half of her face. She had been crying. Her eyes were red and puffy, and there were tear tracks on her cheek. But she was looking at me with curiosity rather than fear or anger. "You've been hearing me cry." I nodded, suddenly feeling like the world's biggest creep. "The walls are really thin. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I've been worried about you." She studied my face for a long moment and I found myself holding my breath. This close, I could see that her eyes were green and that she had a small scar above her left eyebrow. She looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than just being tired. "If you heard me," she said quietly, "why didn't you come sooner?" The question hit me like a punch to the chest. Because I was scared. Because I didn't want to intrude. Because I didn't know what to say. Because I'm the kind of person who overthinks everything until the moment passes and it's too late. "I should have," I said. "I'm sorry." She looked at the mugs in my hands, then back at my face. Something in her expression softened. "I'm Sophia," she said, opening the door a little wider. "Ethan, I know you said that already." There was the faintest hint of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "Is that really chamomile with honey? My sister says it helps." She considered this, then stepped back and opened the door fully. "Come in. But I should warn you, I'm kind of a mess right now." Her apartment had the same layout as mine, but it felt completely different. Where my place was sparse and functional, hers was full of life. Plants everywhere, books stacked on every surface, photographs covering one entire wall. The furniture was mismatched but cozy, like each piece had been chosen for comfort rather than style. "Sorry about the chaos," she said, gesturing vaguely at the room. There were tissues scattered on the coffee table and a blanket wadded up on the couch, but otherwise it looked perfectly normal to me. I handed her one of the mugs and took a seat on the edge of her couch when she nodded toward it. She curled up in the opposite corner, wrapping her hands around the mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. "So, you're a carpenter?" she said after taking a sip of tea. "How did you know that? I've seen you leaving in the morning with your tool bag, and sometimes I can smell sawdust in the hallway after you come home." She paused. "Also, Mr. Henderson mentioned it once." We sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both of us drinking our tea. I found myself looking at the photographs on her wall. Most of them seemed to be from travels, beaches, mountains, city streets I didn't recognize. In several of them, she was with other people, laughing or making silly faces at the camera. Those are from before, she said, noticing my gaze. Before what? She was quiet for so long that I thought she wasn't going to answer. Then she set her mug down on the coffee table and pulled the blanket up to her chin. Before I realized that being a nurse was going to break my heart on a regular basis, I waited for her to continue, sensing that this was important. I love what I do, she said. I really do. But lately, it feels like I'm drowning in other people's pain, and I don't know how to process it all. Today, I lost a patient, a kid only 7 years old. Music. I've been taking care of him for months and his family. They were so hopeful right up until the end. One AI ever two in his family Hyun melanchizes. Justin questions some of that bees with ever tennis only 7 years old. Leukemia. Leukemia. Her voice broke on the last word and I saw fresh tears starting to form in her eyes. I came home and just fell apart. She continued, I've been doing that a lot lately. Coming home and crying until I'm too exhausted to think about work anymore. It's not healthy. I know that. But I don't know what else to do with all this sadness. I set my own mug down and leaned forward slightly. Have you talked to anyone about it? A counselor or someone at work? She shook her head. The other nurses all seem to handle it better than I do. I don't want them to think I'm not cut out for this job. But you are cut out for it, I said. The fact that it affects you this much proves that you care. That matters. She looked at me with surprise, as if she hadn't expected me to understand. My sister went through something similar, I continued. Not nursing, but she was a social worker for a while. She used to come home and cry too, because she cared so much about the kids she was trying to help. It wasn't weakness, it was compassion. Sophia wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. What happened to your sister? Did she quit? She took a break for a while, went back to school, and became a teacher instead. Same desire to help people, but in a way that didn't drain her completely. I paused, she said. The hardest part was feeling like she was alone with all that sadness. Like no one understood what she was carrying around. That's exactly it, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I feel like I'm carrying around all these stories, all this grief, and I don't have anywhere to put it down. We talked for another hour. She told me about the patient she'd lost, the family she'd watched fall apart, the small victories that made it all worthwhile. I told her about my work, how I'd gotten into carpentry after dropping out of college, how there was something satisfying about creating things that would last. I've always been good with my hands, I said, but terrible with words. I never know what to say when someone's hurting. You're doing fine right now, she said. When I finally got up to leave, she walked me to the door. We stood there for a moment, both of us seeming reluctant to end the conversation. Thank you, she said, for the tea and for listening. I didn't realize how much I needed to talk to someone. Anytime, I said and meant it. Would you, she started, then stopped. Would you maybe want to have dinner sometime? I mean, as neighbors, I could cook or we could order something. I'd like that, I said. She smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from her all evening. It transformed her entire face, making her look younger and less burdened. Tomorrow night around 7. Perfect. I went back to my apartment, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. As I got ready for bed, I realized that I'd been carrying around my own kind of loneliness without really acknowledging it. I'd gotten so used to living quietly, keeping to myself that I'd forgotten what it felt like to connect with someone. The next evening, I knocked on Sophia's door at exactly 7 UAC, carrying a bottle of wine and a small wooden box I'd made in my shop that afternoon. It wasn't much, just a simple jewelry box with a hinged lid, but I'd sanded it smooth and applied 3 coats of finish until it gleamed. You made this? She asked when I handed it to her. It's nothing fancy. I just thought you might like it. She ran her fingers over the smooth wood, opening and closing the lid to test the hinges. It's beautiful. Thank you. Dinner was simple. Pasta with marinara sauce and a salad, but it was one of the best meals I'd had in months. We talked about everything. Books, movies, place we wanted to travel, childhood memories. Sophia had grown up in a small town in Ohio, the youngest of 4 kids. Her parents still lived in the same house where she'd learned to ride a bike and had her first kiss. What about you? She asked. Any siblings besides a social worker sister? Just Clara. She's 3 years older and has always been the responsible one. She's married now, has 2 kids, lives about an hour north of here. Do you see them often? Not as much as I should, I admitted. I'm not great at staying in touch with people, but you knocked on my door. That was different. How? I thought about it while twirling pasta around my fork. I guess because you needed someone and I was right there. It seemed wrong to just ignore that. After dinner, we moved to her couch with the rest of the wine. Sophia had put on some music, something soft and folky that I didn't recognize, but liked immediately. The apartment felt warm and lived in, so different from my own sparse place. Can I ask you something? She said, curling her legs up under her. Sure, why carpentry? You mentioned dropping out of college, but you seem like someone who could have done anything. I took a sip of wine, buying myself time to think about how to answer. I didn't usually talk about this stuff, but something about Sophia made me want to be honest. I was studying business, I said. My dad's idea. He thought it would give me stability, a clear career path. But I was miserable sitting in lecture halls learning about profit margins and market analysis. It all felt so removed from real life. So you quit? Not right away. I stuck it out for 2 years, getting more and more depressed. Then one summer, I got a job working construction to make some extra money. First day on the job, this old guy named Frank taught me how to use a circular saw. I'll never forget the feeling of making that first cut, watching the wood fall away exactly where I wanted it to. It was like magic. Sophia smiled. And your parents, they weren't thrilled. My dad especially. He kept saying I was wasting my potential, that I'd regret it when I was older. But I've never regretted it. Not once. There's something about building things, creating something useful with your hands that feels more real than anything I learned in those business classes. I think I understand that, she said. Nursing is like that for me in a way. When I can help someone feel better, when I can make a difference in their worst moment, it feels like the most important thing in the world, but it's also breaking your heart. She nodded, looking down at her wine glass. Yeah, it is. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the music and the distant sounds of the city outside her windows. I found myself studying her profile. The way the lamplight caught the curve of her cheek, the small scar above her eyebrow that I'd noticed the night before. How did you get that scar? I asked. She touched her eyebrow automatically. Fell off my bike when I was 8. Needed 6 stitches. My mom was more upset about it than I was. It suits you. The scar. Yeah, it makes you look tough. She laughed. I don't feel very tough most days, but you are. You go to work every day knowing you might lose someone you care about. That takes incredible strength. She looked at me with those green eyes, and I felt something shift between us. Not romantic exactly, but a deeper understanding, like we were seeing each other clearly for the first time. I should probably go, I said, though I didn't want to. Probably, she agreed. But she didn't move to get up. This was really nice. Thank you for dinner. Thank you for the bucks and for yesterday for caring enough to knock. I stood up and she walked me to the door again. This time when we said good night, she gave me a quick hug. It was brief and friendly, but I could smell her shampoo and feel the warmth of her arms around me. See you soon? She asked. Definitely. Over the next few weeks, we fell into an easy routine. Sophia would text me when she got home from particularly difficult shifts, and I'd come over with tea or wine depending on what kind of day she'd had. Sometimes we talked about work, sometimes about everything else. I learned that she'd wanted to be a veterinarian when she was a kid, that she could speak passable Spanish, that she was afraid of butterflies for reasons she couldn't explain. She learned that I'd built most of my own furniture, that I read mystery novels obsessively, that I'd never been on an airplane. Never, she asked one evening when this last fact came up. Never had anywhere I needed to go that I couldn't drive to. But don't you want to see the world? All those places in my photographs. I looked at the wall of pictures again. They look nice, but I guess I've always been more of a homebody. That's not being a homebody. That's being scared. The comment stung a little because it was probably true. I'd always found reasons not to travel, not to take risks, not to venture too far from the familiar. Maybe I said she must have heard something in my tone because she reached over and touched my arm. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to judge. There's nothing wrong with liking where you are. but her words stayed with me. That night, lying in bed, I found myself thinking about all the things I'd avoided over the years. Not just travel, but opportunities, relationships, experiences that might have pushed me out of my comfort zone. I'd always told myself I was content with my simple life, but maybe contentment and fear looked similar from the inside. The next day was Saturday, and I didn't have any work scheduled. I spent the morning in my shop working on a bookshelf for a client, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept wandering to Sophia's photographs, to all those places I'd never seen. Around noon, I heard her door open and close. I looked out my peephole and saw her heading down the hall with a gym bag. She was wearing running clothes and had her hair pulled back in a ponytail. I'd never seen her in anything but scrubs or casual clothes. And something about seeing her in athletic wear made me realize how little I actually knew about her daily life. I was still thinking about this when she came back an hour later, sweaty and breathing hard. She caught me looking through the peephole and waved. Stalking me now. She called through the door, but she was laughing. I opened my door, feeling embarrassed. Just happened to be looking out when you came back. Sure you were. She was grinning, her cheeks flushed from exercise. Want to come in? I was about to make lunch. I should shower first, she added, gesturing to her sweaty clothes. I can wait. While she showered, I sat on her couch and looked through a magazine she'd left on the coffee table. It was a travel publication full of articles about exotic destinations and adventure trips. I found myself lingering on an article about hiking in Peru, studying the photographs of ancient ruins and mountain vistas. When Sophia came out of the bathroom, her hair was still dampened. She smelled like soap in something floral. Find anything interesting? She asked, nodding toward the magazine. This article about Peru looks incredible. I've always wanted to go there. Machu Picchu is on my bucket list. What's stopping you? She shrugged. Time, money, work, the usual excuses. But you've been to all these other places, I said, gesturing toward her photo wall. Most of those were from college or right after. I had more freedom. Then she sat down next to me and flipped through the magazine. What about you? If you could go anywhere, where would it be? I thought about it seriously, trying to imagine myself somewhere completely different from the familiar streets of my neighborhood. Ireland, maybe? I said finally. I've always been curious about it. The countryside looks beautiful, and I like the idea of all that history. Ireland's amazing. I went there for 2 weeks after I graduated nursing school. Stayed in bed and breakfast, drove around the Ring of Kerry, kissed the bully stone. You kissed the bony stone. Don't look so surprised. I can be adventurous. I didn't say you couldn't. You had that look like you were trying to imagine me doing something spontaneous. She was right. I was having trouble reconciling this image of Sophia traveling solo through Ireland with a woman who cried herself to sleep most nights. People are complicated, she said as if reading my thoughts. I can be brave about some things and terrified about others. What terrifies you besides butterflies? She was quiet for a moment considering the question. Ending up alone, not just single but really alone. Like dying in my apartment and no one noticing for weeks. That's not going to happen. How do you know? Because you're not the kind of person people forget about. You make an impression. She looked at me with surprise. That's a nice thing to say. It's true. We made sandwiches for lunch and ate them on her small balcony, which overlooked the building's courtyard. It wasn't much of a view, just some scraggly trees and a few parked cars. But the October sun was warm and it felt good to be outside. Can I ask you something personal? Sophia said. Sure. Have you ever been in love? The question caught me off guard. I took a bite of my sandwich, buying time to think about how to answer. I thought I was once in my early 20s. Her name was Jessica. We dated for about 2 years. What happened? She wanted more than I was ready to give. Marriage, kids, the whole thing. I kept putting her off, saying I wasn't ready, and eventually she got tired of waiting. Do you regret it sometimes? Not because I think we would have been happy together, but because I wonder if I let fear make the decision for me instead of really thinking about what I wanted. Sophia nodded thoughtfully. I was engaged once about 3 years ago. This was news to me. In all our conversations, she'd never mentioned being engaged. His name was Kevin. We met in college and dated all through nursing school. He was studying to be a doctor, and we had this whole plan mapped out. We'd both finish school. He'd do his residency. I'd work as a nurse. And then we get married and start a family. What happened? He got accepted to a residency program in California. I got a job offer here. We tried long distance for about 6 months, but it didn't work. The thing is, I don't think either of us fought very hard for it. When it started getting difficult, we both just kind of gave up. Do you miss him? I miss the idea of him, the security of having someone, of having a plan, but I don't think I miss him specifically, if that makes sense. It did make sense. I'd felt something similar about Jessica. Missing the relationship more than the person. Is that why you came here for the job? Partly, but also because I wanted to prove to myself that I could make it on my own, that I didn't need someone else's plan to have a good life. And how's that working out? She laughed. But there wasn't much humor in it. Well, I cried myself to sleep most nights and had never had a real conversation with my neighbor until last week. So, mixed results. If you're enjoying this story and it's resonating with you, hype this up. I'd love to know I'm not the only one who believes that sometimes the most important connections happen when we finally stop being afraid to reach out. That afternoon, Sophia had to go to work for an evening shift. After she left, I found myself restless in my own apartment. Everything felt too quiet, too empty. I tried reading, tried watching television, but nothing held my attention. Finally, I went down to my workshop in the basement and started working on a new project. I didn't have a specific plan, just started cutting and shaping pieces of oak, letting my hands work while my mind wandered. I found myself thinking about what Sophia had said about being adventurous in some ways and terrified in others. I was starting to realize that I was the opposite of adventurous in almost every way. I'd built myself a small, safe life and rarely ventured outside of it. But talking to Sophia, spending time in her apartment with all those photographs and stories was making me aware of how limited my world had become. When was the last time I'd done something that scared me? When had I last taken a real risk? By the time I looked up, I'd created the basic frame for what looked like it might become a small table. My hands were covered in sawdust, and my back was stiff from hunching over the workbench. But I felt more centered than I had all day. I was cleaning up when I heard footsteps on the basement stairs. Sophia appeared at the bottom, still in her scrubs, looking exhausted. Mr. Henderson said, "I might find you down here," she said. "How was work?" "Long, hard. We lost someone tonight. An elderly woman who'd been fighting cancer for months. Her family was with her, which was good, but still." She trailed off, looking around the workshop. "This is where you make all those beautiful things. It's not much, but it works." She walked over to the workbench and ran her fingers along the table frame I'd been working on. "What's this going to be?" "Not sure yet. Maybe a side table. Maybe a plant stand." I was just letting my hands work. "Can you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to make something. I've never built anything with my hands before." I looked at her tired face, at the way she was touching the wood with curiosity and longing. "It's not as easy as it looks," I said. "I don't need it to be easy. I need it to be different." I understood what she meant. Sometimes when you're drowning in one kind of experience, you need something completely different to pull you back to the surface. "Okay," I said, "but not tonight. You're exhausted. Tomorrow then, if you don't have work tomorrow." She smiled and I saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank you for this and for being here when I got home. I was dreading coming back to an empty apartment." "You don't have to dread that anymore." The words came out before I could think about them, and I immediately worried they sounded too presumptuous. But Sophia's smile widened. "Is that a promise?" "If you want it to be." She stood on her tiptoes and kissed my cheek. A quick, soft touch that sent warmth spreading through my chest. "I wanted to be," she said. The next day was Sunday, and Sophia knocked on my door at 10 o'clock in the morning with coffee and bagels from the shop down the street. "Ready for Woodworking 101?" she asked. We spent the morning in my workshop, and I quickly discovered that Sophia was a natural. She had steady hands and good instincts, and she listened carefully to everything I told her about safety and technique. We worked on a simple project, ACI, a small wooden box similar to the one I'd made for her, but slightly larger. The key is to let the wood guide you, I said, showing her how to follow the grain as she sanded. Don't fight it. Work with it. She was completely focused, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she worked. Watching her discover the satisfaction of creating something with her hands was almost as rewarding as making something myself. I can see why you love this, she said during a break, examining the box she'd been working on. It was rough around the edges, but the proportions were good and the joints were tight. It's different every time, I said. Even when you're making the same thing, the wood is always different. Each piece has its own personality. Like people. We worked until late afternoon, taking breaks to eat lunch and talk. Sophia told me more about her patients, about the ones who'd recovered and gone home, about the families who'd thanked her for her care. I realized that she'd been focusing so much on the losses that she'd forgotten about the victories. Maybe you need to keep a journal, I suggested. Write down the good stuff too, not just the hard stuff. That's not a bad idea. Sometimes the days blur together and I forget that there are happy endings. 2. When we finally cleaned up, Sophia's box was nearly finished. She held it up to the light, examining it from every angle. I made this, she said, wondering her voice. You did. It's not perfect, but it's mine. Perfect is overrated. Character is what matters. She looked at me with those green eyes, and I felt something shift again between us. We were standing close together in the small workshop and I could smell her shampoo mixed with the scent of sawdust. Ethan, she said softly. Yeah. Thank you for all of this, for listening, for caring, for teaching me something new. I haven't felt this hopeful in a long time. Me neither. We stood there for a moment looking at each other, and I thought about leaning down to kiss her. The moment felt right, charged with possibility. But then she stepped back, breaking the spell. I should probably get cleaned up, she said. I'm covered in sawdust. Right, of course. But as we walked back upstairs together, I couldn't shake the feeling that something important had almost happened, that we'd come right to the edge of something new and then pulled back. That evening, I sat on my couch trying to read, but my mind kept wandering back to that moment in the workshop. Had I imagined the connection I'd felt? Thanks for watching. Was I reading too much into what was probably just friendship and gratitude? Around 9. Aquoa. I heard Sophia's television turn on next door. Not crying tonight, just the familiar sounds of someone settling in for the evening. It occurred to me that I hadn't heard her cry in almost a week. Not since that first night when I brought her tea. Maybe she was getting better. Maybe having someone to talk to, someone who knew what she was going through, was helping her process the difficult parts of her job. Or maybe she was just getting better at hiding it. The thought bothered me more than it should have. I found myself listening more intently, trying to gauge her mood through the thin walls. When I heard her moving around her kitchen, I wondered if she was making dinner or just getting a glass of water. When I heard her shower running, I wondered if she was washing off another difficult day or just getting ready for bed. I was becoming too invested in her daily rhythms. I realized it wasn't healthy for either of us, but I couldn't seem to stop myself from caring. Monday morning, I left for work earlier than usual, hoping to avoid running into Sophia in the hallway. I had a big job starting that week, a whole kitchen's worth of custom cabinets for a house in the suburbs, and I needed to focus. The work was exactly what I needed. Measuring, cutting, fitting, sanding the familiar rhythm of creation that had always been my refuge from complicated emotions. By the end of the day, I felt more like myself again. But when I got home that evening, there was a note slipped under my door. Ethan, thank you again for yesterday. I finished the box and it's sitting on my dresser holding all my earrings. Every time I look at it, I smile. I hope you don't mind, but I told my sister Clara about you. She says, any man who teaches woodworking and makes tea for crying neighbors is a keeper. Hope your work went well today. Sophia. I read the note 3 times, trying to decode every word. She told her sister about me. That seemed significant, but I wasn't sure what it meant. I was still thinking about it when my phone rang. Clara, so she said without preamble, tell me about this neighbor of yours. How did you never mind? What did she tell you? That you're kind and thoughtful and that you make her laugh. Also, that you've never been on an airplane, which I already knew. But apparently, she finds it charming rather than pathetic. It's not pathetic. I didn't say it was. But Ethan, this sounds like more than just neighborly concern. We're friends. Ah, and how do you feel about her? I walked over to my window and looked out at the courtyard, trying to figure out how to answer that question. I care about her, I said finally. But nothing. We're friends. She's going through a hard time and I'm trying to help. Ethan, what? You're allowed to want more than friendship. You know, you're allowed to take a chance on someone. I know that. Do you? Because you have a tendency to talk yourself out of things before you even try. She was right and we both knew it. I'd been doing it my whole life, finding reasons why something wouldn't work instead of focusing on why it might. What if I mess it up? I said. What if I try to turn it into something more and ruin what we have? What if you don't try and spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been? After I hung up, I sat on my couch staring at Sophia's note. Clara was right. I was already halfway to caring about Sophia more than just as a friend. The question was whether I was brave enough to do anything about it. Tuesday evening, Sophia knocked on my door with takeout containers from the Thai place down the street. I thought you might be hungry, she said, and I wanted to cook for you, but I had a 12-hour shift, and I'm too tired to be trusted around sharp objects. Thai food sounds perfect. We ate at my small dining table, which I built myself from reclaimed barnwood. Sophia complimented the craftsmanship, running her hands along the smooth surface. You're really talented, she said. Have you ever thought about doing this full-time? Like having your own furniture business? I am doing it full-time. No, I mean your own line, custom pieces, maybe selling online or at craft fairs. This table is gorgeous. People would pay good money for work like this. I thought about it actually, but starting my own business seemed risky, uncertain. What if I couldn't find enough customers? What if I wasn't as good as I thought I was? It's a nice idea, I said, but I like the security of having regular clients. Security's overrated, she said, echoing my words from the workshop. Says the woman with a steady job and benefits. Says the woman who's thinking about quitting her steady job and benefits. I looked up from my pad thai, surprised. You're thinking about quitting nursing? Maybe. I don't know. I love helping people, but I'm not sure I can keep doing it this way. The hospital is understaffed, everyone's overworked, and there's so much bureaucracy that sometimes it feels like the actual patient care gets lost. What would you do instead? I've been thinking about maybe going back to school, becoming a nurse practitioner, or maybe switching to something completely different. Physical therapy maybe, or teaching. That's a big change. Yeah, scary big. She twirled noodles around her fork, thinking. But maybe scary is what I need right now. I've been playing it safe for so long, and look where it's gotten me. I knew what she meant. We were both guilty of choosing the safe path, the predictable option. Maybe that's why we understood each other so well. What's the scariest thing you can imagine doing? She asked suddenly. Right now, I thought about it. There were a lot of things that scared me. Failure, rejection, change, taking risks. But sitting there looking at Sophia, one thing scared me more than all the others. Telling someone I care about them and having them not feel the same way. The words hung in the air between us. Sophia stopped eating and looked at me with those green eyes, and I felt my heart start racing. That is scary, she said quietly. Yeah, but maybe it's scarier to never tell them at all. Maybe we finish dinner in a different kind of silence than usual. Not uncomfortable exactly, but charged with possibility and uncertainty. When we were cleaning up, our hand brushed as we both reached for the same container, and neither of us pulled away. Ethan, she said. Yeah, I'm glad you knocked on my door that night. Me too. She was standing close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. This time I didn't step back. Sophia, I said, yeah, I think I'm falling for you. The words came out before I could stop them, before I could talk myself out of it or find a safer way to say what I was feeling. She didn't say anything for a long moment, just looked at me with an expression that I couldn't read. I think I'm falling for you too, she said finally. And then she kissed me. It was soft and tentative at first, like she was asking a question. When I kissed her back, it deepened, became something sure and warm and right. Her hands found the front of my shirt and mine tangled in her hair. And for a moment, the whole world narrowed down to just this. The taste of her lips, the sound of her breathing, the way she fit perfectly against me. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathing hard. "Wow," she said. "Yeah, wow." We stood there holding each other, and I felt something settle into place inside my chest like a puzzle piece finding its home. "So, what happens now?" I asked. "I don't know. I've never done this before." "Kiss someone?" She laughed. "Fallen for my neighbor? Started something real with someone who's seen me at my worst? I've never done it either." "Then I guess we'll figure it out together." We moved to the couch and spent the rest of the evening talking and kissing and making plans. Small plans at first: dinner tomorrow night, maybe a movie over the weekend. But as the night went on, the plans got bigger and more ambitious. "I want to take you to Ireland," I said. "You've never even been on a plane." "Then we'll start smaller. Maybe a weekend in the mountains. I could teach you to identify different types of wood." "That sounds incredibly romantic," she said. But she was smiling. "I want to meet your sister, Clara," she said. "And I want you to meet my family, even though they live in Ohio, especially because they live in Ohio." This time you got on that airplane. The idea still scared me, but with Sophia beside me, it seemed possible. A lot of things seemed possible that hadn't before. When she finally went back to her own apartment around midnight, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the evening. The kiss, the conversation, the way she looked at me when I told her I was falling for her. I'd spent so many years playing it safe, avoiding risk, choosing the predictable path. But maybe Clara was right. Maybe the biggest risk was never taking any risks at all. Through the thin wall, I could hear Sophia moving around her apartment, getting ready for bed. But tonight, there was no crying, just the ordinary sounds of someone who was no longer alone with her sadness. I closed my eyes and smiled, thinking about tomorrow night, about the weekend, about all the possibilities stretching out ahead of us. For the first time in years, I was excited about the future instead of just content with the present. And it all started because I finally found the courage to knock on a door. The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness I hadn't expected. Sophia and I fell into an easy rhythm. Dinner together most nights, long conversations that stretched past midnight, lazy Sunday mornings in my workshop where I taught her more advanced techniques, and she taught me to see my own work through fresh eyes. She was right about my furniture. I did have talent, and with her encouragement, I started taking photographs of my pieces and creating an online portfolio. Within a month, I had 3 new clients who had found me through my website. "See," she said, looking over my shoulder as I responded to an email inquiry. "I told you people would pay good money for work like this. It was your idea, but you're the one with the skill. I just helped you see it." Sophia had started keeping that journal I'd suggested, writing down both the difficult days and the victories. She still came home exhausted sometimes, still struggled with the emotional weight of her job, but she seemed better able to process it all. "I think I want to stay in nursing," she told me one evening as we cooked dinner together in her kitchen. "But maybe move to a different unit. Pediatric oncology is too much for me right now. But there are other ways to help people." "What kind of other ways?" "Maybe labor and delivery or the cardiac unit. Still challenging, but with more happy endings." "That sounds like a good compromise." "I think so, too. I don't have to choose between caring for people and taking care of myself." We were getting good at taking care of each other, too. When I had a particularly frustrating day dealing with a difficult client, Sophia would listen patiently and help me see the situation from a different angle. When she had a rough shift, I'd make her tea and let her talk through whatever was bothering her. It wasn't always easy. We were both still figuring out how to be in a relationship, how to balance independence with interdependence, but we were figuring it out together, and that made all the difference. One Saturday morning in late November, Sophia woke up early and knocked on my door with coffee and a mischievous smile. "Get dressed," she said. "We're going on an adventure." "What kind of adventure?" "The kind where you don't get to ask questions. Just trust me." An hour later, We were in her car driving north out of the city. The trees were bare now, but the landscape was beautiful in its darkness. Sophia had music playing softly and the windows cracked just enough to let in the crisp autumn air. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" I asked as we turned off the highway onto a smaller road. "Nope, but we're almost there." 20 minutes later, she pulled into the parking lot of a small regional airport. My stomach dropped. "Sophia, no." "Sophia, yes." She turned off the engine and looked at me with determination. "You said you wanted to take me to Ireland someday. Well, we're starting smaller." "How much smaller?" "A 40-minute flight to see the fall foliage from the air." I booked us seats on one of those scenic tour flights. I stared at the small planes lined up on the tarmac, my heart racing. "I can't." "Yes, you can. What if something goes wrong? What if something goes right?" She reached over and took my hand. "Ethan, I know you're scared, but I'll be right there with you. And think about how proud you'll be of yourself afterward." I looked at her face, at the excitement and encouragement in her eyes, and I realized that this was what love looked like. Not just accepting someone as they are, but believing they could be more than they thought possible. "Okay," I said. Okay, let's do it." Her smile was brilliant. "Really? Really? But if I throw up on you, don't say I didn't warn you." The flight was terrifying and exhilarating and absolutely beautiful. The landscape spread out below us like a patchwork quilt, all golds and reds and deep greens. Sophia held my hand the entire time, pointing out landmarks and taking pictures with her phone. "Look," she said as we banked over a lake that reflected the sky like a mirror. "Isn't it incredible?" It was incredible. Not just the view, but the feeling of doing something that scared me, of pushing past my own limitations. When we landed safely 40 minutes later, I felt like I could do anything. "How do you feel?" Sophia asked as we walked back to her car. "Like I want to book a flight to Ireland." She laughed and kissed me right there in the parking lot. And I thought about how different my life was now compared to just 2 months ago. How much bigger and brighter and full of possibility. That night, we lay in my bed talking about the future. Real plans now, not just wishful thinking. Sophia had applied for a transfer to the cardiac unit and was cautiously optimistic about her chances. I had enough new clients that I was considering renting a larger workshop space. "What if we got a place together?" she said suddenly, like moved in together eventually. "I mean, we're practically living together already. You're at my place or I'm at yours every night." It was true. We'd been spending so much time together that our separate apartments had started to feel redundant. "I'd like that," I said. "But maybe we should wait until you know about the transfer. And I know if this business expansion is going to work out, always the practical one. One of us has to be." She propped herself up on her elbow and looked down at me. "Do you know what I love about you? My devastating good looks and natural charm. Besides that," she traced patterns on my chest with her finger. "You make me feel safe. Not just physically safe, but emotionally safe. Like I can be completely myself with you, even the messy parts. You make me feel brave," I said. "Like I can try things that scare me because you believe I can do them. We're a good team." "Yeah, we are." She curled up against my side and I wrapped my arms around her, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo. "Ethan, I love you." The word sent warmth spreading through my entire body. I'd been feeling it for weeks, but neither of us had said it out loud yet. "I love you too." We held each other in the darkness, and I thought about how different this was from what I'd had with Jessica or what Sophia had described with Kevin. This wasn't just comfortable or convenient or safe. This was real and deep and transformative. A few weeks later, Sophia got the transfer to the cardiac unit. Her first day on the new floor, she came home energized instead of drained. "It's so different," she told me over dinner. "Still challenging, still emotional sometimes. But there's more hope, more success stories." I helped deliver a baby today. The mom had a heart condition, so they brought her to our unit for monitoring. When I handed her that baby, the look on her face, she shook her head, smiling. "That's what I became a nurse for." "I'm so proud of you," I said. "For what?" "For not giving up. For finding a way to keep doing what you love without destroying yourself in the process." My business expansion was going well, too. I'd found a perfect workshop space in an old warehouse that was being converted to artist studios. It was 3 times the size of my basement workshop with better lighting and room for larger projects. Want to see it? I asked Sophia one Saturday morning. The space was empty except for some sawhorses and my tools, but Sophia walked around it like she was touring a mansion. Ethan, this is amazing. You could build anything in here. That's the idea. She stopped in front of the large windows that faced east where the morning light would be perfect for detail work. I can see you here, she said. Really see you. This is where you're supposed to be. 6 months after that first night when I knocked on her door with chamomile tea, Sophia and I were loading the last of her boxes into my truck. We'd found a small house to rent across town with a yard and a garage I could convert into a workshop. Ready? I asked, closing the tailgate. Ready? We drove through our old neighborhood one last time, past the apartment building where we'd met, where we'd learned to love each other. Do you think we would have found each other if we hadn't lived next door? Sophia asked. I don't know. Maybe. But I'm glad we didn't have to find out. Our new house was small but perfect for us. 2 bedrooms, one of which Sophia claimed as her office space for the nursing classes she decided to take. A kitchen with enough room for both of us to cook together. A living room with built-in bookshelves that I'd already started planning to replace with custom ones. That first night in your new home, we sat on the floor of the empty living room eating pizza and planning where everything would go. I want to put the photo wall there, Sophia said, pointing to the space next to the fireplace. But I want to add new pictures too. Pictures of us. We don't have very many pictures of us. Then we'll have to make some memories worth photographing. She was right. We'd been so focused on getting to know each other, on building our relationship that we hadn't documented much of it. But that was okay. We had plenty of time for memory making. Where should we go first? I asked for our first real vacation together. Ireland, she said without hesitation. Ireland, it is. I pulled out my phone and started looking at flights, and Sophia laughed. Look at you browsing airplane tickets like it's nothing. I had a good teacher. The best teacher is experience and love. She was right about that too. Love had made me braver, more willing to take risks, more open to possibilities I'd never considered before. As we sat there planning our future, I thought about that night when I'd heard her crying through the wall. If I'd continued to ignore it, if I'd never found the courage to knock on her door, where would we both be now? Still alone in our separate apartments, still carrying our fears and sadnesses by ourselves. But I had knocked and she had answered, and everything had changed. Hey, Sophia said, interrupting my thoughts. Yeah, thank you for what? For hearing me? For coming when I needed someone, even though it took you a while to work up the courage. Thank you for answering the door, for letting me in. She leaned over and kissed me soft and sweet and full of promise. Always, she said. I'll always let you in. And as we held each other in our new home, surrounded by boxes full of the life we were building together, I knew that some risks were worth taking, some doors were worth knocking on, and some love was worth waiting for. Even if you didn't know, you were waiting until it finally arrived. The thin walls that had once separated us had become the bridge that brought us together. And now there were no walls between us. In the quiet hush of an ordinary apartment building, where thin walls whisper secrets we often pretend not to hear. Ethan's story with Sophia unfolds like a gentle reminder from life itself. He, a carpenter crafting sturdy cabinets from raw wood, lives in solitude, his days filled with the scent of sawdust and the rhythm of tools. Yet one evening the muffled sobs from next door pierce his routine, pulling at the threads of his own unspoken loneliness. For weeks he hesitates, trapped in the shadows of doubt, fear of intrusion, of awkwardness, of exposing his own vulnerabilities. But when he finally knocks, bearing a simple cup of chamomile tea sweetened with honey, he steps into a world transformed. Sophia, a nurse bearing the weight of others' pains, the loss of a young patient to leukemia, the crumbling hopes of families, opens her door, her green eyes rimmed with exhaustion, and asks, "If you heard me, why didn't you come sooner?" In that moment, a bridge forms over the chasm of isolation. This tale teaches us a profound lesson. In a world racing with distractions, True connection begins with the courage to listen and act. We all carry invisible burdens, grief like Sophia's, quiet regrets like Ethan's, and too often we build walls around our hearts, assuming no one notices or cares. But life whispers that one small gesture born from empathy can shatter those barriers. It reminds us that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's the doorway to healing, to love, to growth. Ethan learns to embrace risks. From his first flight to building a shared future, Sophia finds solace in shared stories, turning her tears into strength. Together, they show that we're never truly alone. Opportunities for kindness surround us, waiting for us to knock. Imagine if Ethan had stayed silent. Two souls adrift in adjacent emptiness. Yet by reaching out, he not only saves her from drowning in sorrow, but redeems his own stagnant life. This is life's quiet invitation to notice the cries behind closed doors, to offer a hand without expecting return. It urges us to step beyond comfort zones. For in those leaps lie the deepest joys, unexpected friendships, transformative romances, and the warmth of being seen. If this story touched your heart, stirring memories of your own missed connections or brave knocks, share them in the comments below. Let's build a community of empathy together. And if you're moved by tales that blend heartache with hope, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. More inspiring stories await to remind you that every wall can become a bridge. Your thoughts matter. Let's hear them.